All right. Hey, all right. Since we know canoes, picture this. All right. As freezing water thrashed their rowboat in some of the most treacherous waters in the world, our speaker and five others fought for 13 days to make history, becoming the first people to traverse the infamous Drake Passage with nothing other than sheer manpower. He's a native of California with 20 years of rowing experience and was a silver medalist in the IRA National Championship and captain of the Yale crew team. Today, he's a school leader in West Oakland at Kip Bridge Academy, ensuring that his students can go to and through college and build choice-filled lives. He lives in Oakland with his daughter, Mariana, and wife, Sarah. So let's have a raging, turbulent welcome for John Peterson.
Good morning, everybody. I wasn't nervous, and then all of a sudden I got nervous when Buddy started to introduce me. So I want to just thank you all for having me on this morning. I'm excited to talk about the Drake Passage with you all. It's kind of crazy to think that given what's happened this year, this is like one of maybe the second or third craziest thing that's happened in my life. Given the pandemic and the shelter in place and everything else. So it'll be nice to go back to the Drake and talk to you all this morning. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, Buddy, and I think I can go through that. And I've done this before. And I think the best way to do it really is to, as I'm talking, if you have questions specific to what I'm talking about, just jump in and ask those questions, because usually a lot of folks have questions on specifics, like where we went poop every day, for example, which we can talk about. So I will share my screen and then we can get started. Give me 1 second. If you can see that, give me a thumbs up. Okay, beautiful. All right. So as Buddy said, my name is John Peterson, and I do live in Oakland in the Temescal neighborhood, a principal in West Oakland at Kip Bridge. And I'm at home right now, and my daughter's just waking up, so she may be in the background in a couple minutes, just as a heads up. It'll be good if you all can meet her, because she was my inspiration through the trip too. So let me get started. I give a little bit of history of the Drake Passage and a couple updates on just logistics that we went through to get across the Drake. And like I said, if you have questions as we're going through, feel free to jump in. The Drake Passage is considered one of the most treacherous and dangerous oceans in the world. And the distance between the Drake Passage and then the mainland of Antarctica, which is that peninsula that juts out there at the bottom, is about 700 nautical miles, give or take. And that's the part that we were going across. And we went from Cape Horn down to the mainland of Antarctica there at the peninsula. A lot of people have been around Cape Horn, going all the way back to, I'm sure even before Magellan, but some of the most famous explorers, one of them being Magellan. And it's been said that over 10,000 people have died there at Cape Horn over the years in terms of just the treacherousness of the ocean. And here's just a sample of why it's so challenging in terms of waters and storms. It's basically like a big washing machine at the pole of the earth, and the water and the weather just gets funneled through those two land masses between South America and Antarctica. And so as a result, you get really, really strong current here that you can see in this next slide. And the water and the wind and the weather that comes through there is just extremely powerful. When we were out on the water, we saw major storms every 8 hours or so. So if you wanted to, we basically would get an 8-hour reprieve of wind, rain, or snow, and then something else would hit us again, which was challenging, is what I would say. I think that one of the big reasons why the Cape itself, Cape Horn, is so dangerous is because the water stream that goes between Antarctica and South America is pretty deep, except for the 120 miles off the coast where the shelf comes up to about 40 meters. And because of that, as waves are coming through, y'all are local, so you've probably been or heard of Mavericks, right? That there's an extreme amount of water that's coming through there, and then it's raised up to a really shallow depth, and the waves there get huge. And at the Cape, you can see waves if in really stormy parts of the year up to 90 feet. We saw waves going across up to 40 feet, which was scary. I'll just say that. I want to just mention also some of the history, and folks on here probably have heard about Shackleton and his journey, which was in and of itself one of the most amazing ocean journeys ever. And his journey was on land, which is the green portion on there, and then water as well. If you don't know about Shackleton, I strongly suggest reading. There's a not an autobiography, but a biography of Shackleton that's fantastic. The author's name is escaping me right now. I'll remember it by the end. I'll type it into the chat. But this was his journey into South Georgia. And that's a picture of the ship that they had. So here we are on the ocean. I'll explain a little bit about the ship itself, or the boat that we are on. As you can see, 3 guys are rowing at a time, and all 3 of us, it was nonstop continuous, right? So we didn't have a sail or anything to keep our momentum going forward, which meant that we had to be rowing at all times in order for the bow of the boat to stay in line with the waves that were coming through. Because if we turned and breached to the side, that's where we are in the danger zone, and that's where the boat can turn over. For 13 days, we rowed 90-minute shifts, 90 minutes on, 90 minutes off, and during that time, you could sleep in the, I'll use my cursor, you can't see where I'm pointing. There were 2 guys that would sleep here, the captain, Fian, Paul, and Colin O'Brady. They would sleep in this section, and then 4 of us would sleep in the bow section. You could really only fit comfortably, I mean, honestly, comfortably, not even 1 person, but you could sleep 2 people in here at a time. And then in major storms, we would put 3 people in here. There was one night where we saw 40-foot waves, and we were all really scared, so we all got in here. And the reason for that is because once those hatches are closed, this boat is considered a lifeboat. It doesn't sink, but the only way it can sink is if water floods into those hatches. So in theory, if it flips over, it rights itself back up. And so we actually practiced that before leaving, flipping the boat over, which I have a picture in here to show you all. There were a couple other features here that I want to point out to folks. We did have navigational equipment. And so we were able to see and track storms as they were coming through. Also, the boat itself had an auto rudder and was able to keep course for us. And in some of the larger waves, there was one evening, the first big storm that we were in, where we saw it was probably 25 knot tailwind and 20-foot waves, and basically rowing on flat water, no wind, perfect conditions. You can probably row in about 3.5 knots to 4 knots, and rowing in that condition, 25 knot tailwinds, huge 20-foot waves, we were getting up to 14 knots going down these waves. To put that in perspective, we did have a assisting vessel or safety vessel that followed us, which was part of the Antarctic Treaty. There's an organizing body that basically allows boats to go to the continent of Antarctica. And part of their treaty is that if you are going to do something as crazy as we did without having a motor to cross the Drake Passage, you have to have a safety vessel with you. So they were always on the horizon. At times we could see them, at times we couldn't. But to give you some perspective on speed, that boat, the Braveheart, which had huge diesel engines, would go about 14 knots with its engines running. So we were going down these waves at 14 knots and essentially felt like we were surfing down the waves. At the bottom of the waves, the auto rudder would kick in and you could feel the boat fishtail back and forth. And while we were sleeping, there's a huge ballast underneath the boat, a metal ballast underneath the boat. And the waves, the power of the waves would come through and you could hear that metal shaking as you were sleeping inside the boat. And for me, that first night of rowing through one of the big major storms that we had was probably one of the scariest nights of my life. And so in terms of messages and just the power of positivity and how teamwork can save your life, I was in the cabin and I remember looking over to one of my teammates, Andrew, and saying, Andrew, I don't know if I can go back out there. We had been out rowing for about 12 hours in this storm. And Andrew's like, you got to go back. Like, you don't have a choice. You have to go back out there. We have to keep rowing because if we don't, like I said, if you stop rowing, the boat doesn't go forward and then you can breach and then the boat can flip with the possibility of death. So that's a pretty big motivator to go back out and keep rowing. But as we were opening up the hatch to make a switch, Jamie Douglas Hamilton, who's Scottish and was one of the teammates in the boat, he opens the door and he looks at me and he goes, "This is awesome." And I looked at him and I was like, this crazy, like this guy is absolutely nuts. But in terms of the power of positivity in that moment, I was like, okay, if Jamie's good, I'm good. I felt like I was at knocking on death's door and here's Jamie saying how excited he is to be surfing down these huge waves out in the middle of the ocean. And it was moments like that where you're reminded about the power of positivity and also this idea of get to versus have to. And I would remind myself, I was like, this is something that you get to do, not something that you have to do. And I think that mindset is something that's carried me through a lot of experiences as an athlete in college and also as a school leader and a principal of an elementary school in West Oakland too. But I think being out there, I would remind myself, like, you get to do this. This is something that you've chosen and put yourself in this situation, and it's frame this in a positive way because even as you're facing possible death, I think it's the frame in which you face that is super, super important. So Jamie was the first person to kind of reframe my brain out there on the Drake. And this is just a picture. Jamie and Cameron and Fian actually were the first to cross the Indian Ocean. And so this is a picture of them doing that. And this boat was a lot larger than our boat and had more people. I'm going to pause there for a second and I know I've been talking for a minute and go back to my chat and see if there's any questions. Yeah, if you want to I don't know if dump's the right word, put questions into the chat as I'm going through, I'll check those too periodically. So I see one of the questions from Ernie came in, which is, if one of the rowers could not continue, were there backup rowers on the support ship? No, it was just us. There was 6 of us, so I'm there on the far left. And then Cameron Bellamy is next to me. Cameron is South African. And Cross the Indian Ocean is also holds world records for distance swimming in the ocean. So he's an ocean swimmer. Next to him is Andrew Town, who was a teammate of mine in college. And then next to him is Colin O'Brady, who also was a classmate of mine at Yale. And we actually hadn't seen each other all for 14 years. And then reunited again on this trip. Next to him is Jamie, who is from Scotland, who I was telling you about, who was the crazy Scottish nut. who told me about this idea of loving being out there surfing on the water. And then next to him is Fian Paul, and Fian is an ocean rower. That's his full-time job. He also is the captain of the boat, and holds the record for crossing every ocean in the world on a rowboat. So those were the 6 of us. There wasn't an extra guy. There was nobody else behind us, right? So if somebody got injured, the boat we were rowing in was built for 4 people. We took 6 because we knew that the Drake was going to present some really difficult challenges, and if somebody did get injured, the boat could still be powered by 4 guys. By doing that, we also were really tight and cramped in the spaces, and so that was sort of the trade-off that we had. And I saw another question, just to go back. The question from Jim was 3 rowers and 3 people rowing and 3 people resting at 90-minute intervals. That's right. So every 90 minutes, we would switch in and switch out, which meant you never got to sleep for longer than 60 minutes at the most, if you were lucky. And so we would, in that time when you were resting, you would jump in, kick off your shoes, usually take your gloves off, put your gloves on top of your chest, and then pull a sleeping bag up over the top of you. After the first 12 hours or so, Andrew Town, who's there in the middle, he and I were cabin mates together, and we both said, we're sharing a sleeping bag together. It's too cold. So Andrew and I would actually get into one sleeping bag together for body warmth and huddle together. It was cold. I mean, I did get frostbite on my toes and on my fingers. And at the end of the trip, I came back with basically my fingernails weren't fully black, but they had a bunch of black spots on them. That's how cold it was. So we would share a sleeping bag together, and in that I was talking about that 90 minutes off. So you jump in, kick your shoes off, pull up your sleeping bag. We had a small little butane that allowed us to heat up some water, and we would pour that into some freeze-dried food. We used this company called Mountain House, and they had 5 different flavors. One of them was, by the end of it, I really could only eat one, which was the Italian sausage and spaghetti. And we would usually eat 5 or 6 of those during the course of a 24-hour period. After we eat, part of it was also just taking care of your body. So you would make sure that you had, we called it pseudo-cream, but it's a version of like what you might put on diaper rashes, basically, if you have had children. Destin, I think, is a common brand, and you just rub that on every space that can get friction. And that way you would prevent getting sores. And then you'd sleep for about 55 minutes, and then wake up and do it all again. Over the course of the trip, just to put it in perspective around eating and taking care of your body, I lost 22 pounds in 13 days. So a really good diet trick, if you want to lose some weight quick, just row across the Drake Passage. It was impossible to keep up with the amount of calories we were burning and the amount of food we could eat. I'm going to pause there and just check in on questions too. Yeah, Richard, I saw your note about Mountain House turkey. That was not on our trip. We did have chicken and dumplings, which was pretty good. But Cameron, the big guy, Cameron was the big guy on the trip. He's like 6'3", 6'4", 200 and probably 40 pounds. We'd always joke that Cameron was eating everybody's food. We had plenty of food for all of us, but Cameron was always eating the chicken and dumplings. And did I bulk up before the trip knowing that I'd lose weight? I actually didn't. In fact, I lost weight before the trip to get back into shape. I had been a principal and a dad for a few years and had put on some extra weight actually that I probably needed to lose. And so getting back into shape, I lost probably 15 pounds before I left for the trip, to get back to weight that was where my body was efficient. And so that was probably the most important thing to me, is just making sure that I was super efficient before I went, which sounds a little counterintuitive, but it was important to me to make sure that I was in really, really good physical shape before leaving. All right, let me keep going. This is us getting the boat ready. The name of our boat was the Ohana. And Ohana, it's a Hawaiian word, which means family. As you can see, there were 4 different countries represented on the trip. And before we left, we staged in a warehouse in Punta Arenas, which is in Chile, near the Cape Horn. And you can see all the different supplies that went into the boat, including we had these freeze-dried bars, as well as all the Mountain House freeze-dried food. And this is a picture of us right before we left in Punta Arenas in our safety suits. So these safety suits were designed for this trip. And it kind of is a cross between a wetsuit and what you might call a dry suit. You've seen those on, excuse me one second. A dry suit, which you can see on ships as a safety survival suit. And so we had these made. Fia and Paul, who was the captain, had these made for us before we left. And basically the idea was that if we did capsize, if we did go in the water itself, where we started at the Cape Horn was about 6 degrees Celsius. And when we got close to Antarctica, passing the 60th parallel, was down to 0 degrees Celsius. So in 0 degrees Celsius, you have probably at a maximum in really, really great, favorable, if you're lucky situation, maybe 45 minutes to live. In a likely situation, about 20 minutes to live. And so these safety suits were a line of defense in case we did go on the water. Technically, they were supposed to keep you floating, which they did. We practiced. And they also, they were a unique feature for the row too, because you can see they had this little drawstring in the front. So if you had to go pee, it was easy to do that too. We put on these safety suits by day. We didn't wear them really until day 10. And the reason we started wearing them is because we started to see some really big waves at 40 feet. And this was, you know, the threat of death. I don't know if that was always in our minds, but it definitely was something that passed through my mind a couple of times. And one of the things that always worried me was if we did fall into the water, while there was a safety vessel nearby or close to us, the amount of time that it would take to get us in a major storm was going to be much longer than 20 minutes. Plus, there's 6 of us, in which at that point they would have to make a decision on who they were going to be picking up out of that water. And so, for me, that was the most. I would say it's probably the most terrifying part of the trip in the back of my head. Keep going on these photos. Yep. So here's a picture of us. We did a capsize test before we left. We wanted to make sure that if we did get rolled out there on the water, that we would be able to that the boat itself would be able to right itself back up over again. And so we practiced, and you can see we're all in our safety suits. I'm there at the end. That was one of the last ones to fall in when we did this practice. And the boat itself it flipped. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It flipped itself right over, and took us back up to the top. So we knew that the boat was going to be safe if we did flip, and we didn't actually flip during the row, which I'm happy to say didn't happen. But we were certain that the boat was going to be able to carry us through some major stuff. Here's the photo. This is just a photo of the Braveheart. This is the boat that followed us. And like I said, sometimes the trip itself was filmed by Discovery Channel, and so the reason why we got this big boat to follow us was in part because the camera crew was living on this boat to film us over the course of the trip. And so sometimes we could see them, sometimes we couldn't. And you can see this photo. This is our boat right here on the deck as they're carrying us back after the trip. And so to put it in perspective, this boat, our little boat here versus the size of this boat can sleep about 15 people, maybe 20 people. And of course, our little boat here that we took across. And this is just a picture of the Magellan Strait coming back. One other thing that happened before we left was, that was kind of ominous. Before we took off, a Chilean Navy airplane crashed into the Drake Passage the night before we were planning on leaving. So the Chilean Navy came up to us in Puerto Williams, which is about a 12-hour or so boat ride to Cape Horn, and probably one of the southernmost naval outposts in the world. So here's a picture of the Chilean Navy coming up to us, and they basically told us we couldn't go because they're like, "Are you all nuts? Like, we just had a plane crash with 47 people died in that crash." And they're like, "We have all of our resources out there on the Drake searching for people." They're like, if you all go, we're not going to be able to come and get you, so you can't go. And so the trip was almost derailed in the beginning, but we were able to, our captain was able to talk to the Navy commander there in the port, and eventually convince them that they were going to be looking out for us, and if something did happen, that we had a safety outlet. And we convinced them that we should go. One of the tricky things, though, was there was this huge space in the middle of the Drake Passage that there's a no-go zone. So if you were a ship, a vessel that was going to Antarctica, whether you were a little tiny rowboat or a huge cruise ship, you couldn't go through this area. So we had to make a decision on how we were going to row around this area as we were going through, which actually meant that when we left, we decided to go west instead of going east, so that we would be able to tack back and get ourselves pushed back across the Drake, hopefully getting around this big area in space. I saw Annie ask why no passage in that area. That was a no-go zone by the Chilean Navy because that's where the airplane had crashed before we left. I also saw your question, Annie. Any sea creatures? Okay, baby girl. So any sea creatures? Yeah, we saw some, and I think they're going to come up. Oh, this is just a picture of us with our captain, Matt Nigel, is here, and this was him telling us that we were going to be able to go across the Drake. And let me pause. Let me pause here. Whoops. Okay. Sorry, y'all. So, yeah, any sea creature encounters. Annie, you asked that question. We did see a lot of sea life. The most common thing that we saw as we were going across was albatross. And albatross are seabirds that have a wingspan of up to 12 feet. One thing that we would always joke about is when if the albatross could weather a storm, we could weather a storm. They would be out there sitting in these 30-foot waves like it wasn't even anything happening. And so we always kind of felt like they were the angels on our shoulders crossing the Drake. And they followed us all the way across. There were always albatross next to us. We also saw whales as we got closer to Antarctica, penguins. The sea life that's there in Antarctica is just amazing. We saw leopard seals. In fact, when we landed on the peninsula and stepped on land, there were a few leopard seals right there next to where we were. There was like hundreds of penguins and a huge whale breached right where we were. So I mean, it was almost like being in a movie. You can't it was almost like we couldn't even write that script. There were just so many amazing animals and sea life there. So this was the journey that we took with the Braveheart. We didn't actually row this part from Punta Arenas down to Cape Horn. And that trip took us about 3 or 4 days to get all the way down there by boat, just to give you perspective of the distance there. And then once we had gotten to Cape Horn, obviously this is a picture of Cape Horn on a good day. And you can see that here at the Cape, the wind and the waves just start to whip up. And so on the first day, getting into the water, we lowered the boat in. That's me on the boat. And you can't really tell, but there's about a 10-foot swell just coming through. And so we're going up and down 10, 15 feet as we're putting the boat in the water. And this is actually one of the most dangerous parts of the whole trip because the boat itself was really unstable. And if you're able to watch some of the videos, it's captured, but the Braveheart and our ship actually collided and hit. And I was the only one on the boat trying to like hold us off, which wasn't going to happen. And luckily we got the boat off and were able to do it without having any damage to the vessel. And this is us getting started. I mentioned before that it was a never stop adventure. So it was row on, once you were rowing for 90 minutes and once you were sleeping, then you were off for 90 minutes and then get back up and do it again. One of the amazing things about the trip one of the things I find amazing, and I think it is super important when you're thinking about the power of teamwork, is that to a person, every guy on the trip never took a break. We talked about this before we left, and we had said, you know, there might be times where you get a nagging injury or you hurt yourself, but during the trip, nobody ever took a break. Everybody hit their shifts, and part of that was just you knew how difficult it was to be out there rowing, and you didn't want to let your teammates down. Careful, baby. So here's where we were after day 3. And I think I have a video here. Yeah, I think it's the next one. So on day 3, we hit our first big storm with wind that was pushing us backwards. And in fact, I think after the third day, we went backwards almost 120 nautical miles. So we had rowed about that distance that day, and then we got pushed back pretty far in this storm. So you can see our boat there. The reason that nobody's out there, you can't see anybody, is we did something called a, sorry, I'm having a brain lapse here. We did something called a sea anchor, and you can see this line here off the bow. Essentially, what's underneath the water up here is a big parachute, and that sea anchor, sailboats have these, a lot of times smaller vessels have these out in the ocean. Essentially, in a major storm, it keeps your bow facing the direction of the waves and the wind. And so if the waves and the elements get too difficult, then we would go inside of these, inside of the bow and the stern. So that's why nobody's out here on the deck, except there is one little person here. So like I mentioned at the beginning, this boat is built for 4 guys. We had 6, and all 6 of us were all over 6 feet, all close to 200 pounds or more. And so fitting 3 guys inside this little tiny bow space was a challenge. Fitting 4 guys was basically impossible. So one of us would always sit out here on the deck in 90-minute shifts while we were waiting for the major storms to pass. And usually at Sea Anchor, we did it 4 times over the course of the trip. Usually sat there for about, we'd usually sit there for about 18 hours at the most, I think was the longest one. And during that time, while you're in here, we would sleep because we weren't sleeping obviously while we were rowing, and there's Mariana. Yeah, so we would be sleeping here in this space. Buddy, I saw your question. Did anyone have any annoying habits, any tense moments? I would say that something that was pretty remarkable about the trip, and I think this spoke to who the guys were in the boat, is we, like I said, nobody took time off. So there wasn't ever this idea of like, oh, I'm gonna work harder than somebody else. Everybody wanted to make sure that they were doing their part. I got to see more of Andrewtown than I probably ever wanted to see, because he and I are in that small space. We'd have to change and take care of all the nether parts all the time, because that's an area that gets obviously, like if it gets a lot of salt and sweat down there, you can start to get sore. So you really had to take care of your rear end. Yeah, I got to see a lot of Andrew. So I wouldn't call that annoying. I just call it like, a close encounters. Any tense moments, I mentioned that moment out there on the first big storm when we're surfing down those waves at 14 knots and Jamie coming into the boat and being like, this is awesome. If anything, there were moments where the tense feeling that was there was cut by other guys. There was another moment on the trip where I got really seasick. We all wore patches behind our ears to prevent seasickness, and I didn't realize that my patch had fallen off. And so it comes on kind of slowly, and after about 6 hours of my stomach feeling really, really bad, I realized like, shoot, I am going to be seasick. So I go out for my shift. It was a 1 a.m. shift. And night times were always really challenging. And I go out and I start rowing, and I'm like, I'm going to throw up. And I hadn't thrown up the whole trip. This was day 9. So I throw up over the side of the boat. And then I keep rowing and I throw up again. And Colin O'Brady comes out and he says, hey man, do you want me to take your shift for you? Like, I got you. Like, I'll do this. You're really sick. Like, why don't you take a break? Get a new patch. And of course I was like, no, you can't take my shift. I got this. Like, you need to rest. But in that moment where things were really challenging and difficult, again, it was a teammate who kept me going. So I think, yeah, I'm a big believer in team, and I'm a big believer in the power of teamwork. And Jamie in that first big storm, and Colin when I was throwing up over the side of the boat, both kept me going. And in that moment where I was throwing up over the side of the boat and rowing in the middle of the night, you have to train your brain to go to sort of a deep, dark place. And what I did for that 90 minutes is every single stroke, I said my daughter's name. So every stroke I said, Mari. And that's what carried me through those 90 minutes. I think it was probably the hardest, some of the hardest 90 minutes of my life. So I see another question come through from, I think it's Michael E. How many hours of dark a day that far south? We saw the sun most of the day. And so the sun would set, especially once we were close to Antarctica, the sun would set around 11 p.m. and would rise again around 4 a.m. So not that much darkness. And even then at night, it wasn't all that dark. I think this is a quick video to show the size of the waves.
Is there supposed to be sound?
Can you all hear it or no?
No. So what you may need to do is to stop sharing, and then in the lower left corner of the window, you'll see a little checkbox for something about sound. So go ahead and share again. This time check the little box in the lower left corner.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You bet.
Buddy, how am I doing on time?
You are doing great, actually. You still have 15 minutes.
Okay. Let try this again. And the voice that you're going to hear is Jamie.
So you put a parachute out the back. The problem was not all of us could fit into the hatch. So we had 3 people in one hatch, and one person had always had to be outside. I was actually outside in that changeover, going outside.
Yeah, so, you know, you're sitting out there in these storms, and this was I think this is our day 3 storm, so waves are in the area of 25 feet, but got up to 40, and you can see in those conditions, waves would come over the top of the boat, and you're sitting out here on the deck while the 3 other guys are in there sleeping. That's a life-changing moment. Wondering if you're going to make it through those minutes sitting out there on the deck. You can see here there's these safety lines, and we'd have on a life jacket, and then the life jacket would have a safety cord that was attached to the safety line. One fear that I had out there was the safety line. We had to make a decision of whether we wanted a short safety line or a long safety line. And we all chose to go with short safety lines. The fear with a longer safety line is that we potentially could get tangled and caught underneath the boat if it did flip. And so we all decided to go with the short safety line, which presumably would pull us back up to the top of the water quickly. But I always carried a knife on me just in case. One of the fears in the back of my brain was like, if I get stuck under the boat with this safety line, I need something to cut it. And so I would always have a knife on me just in case as we were going through.
So you put a parachute out.
Let's see if I go to the next slide here.
So you put
Okay, so day 4, we did get pushed back. You can see the water temperature there was around 2 degrees Celsius. I'm sorry, the air temp 2 degrees Celsius, water temp around 6. And as we would go through, it would get closer and closer to 0 degrees. Right after this big storm, we had this huge cruise ship come out of it was almost like coming out of the mist. And it was sort of surreal because we hadn't seen anybody for 4 days, and then all of a sudden the ship comes out and blows its horn, and you can kind of see people on the ship came out to wave at us and cheer us on, and it was a pretty remarkable moment. Just another photo of us in the waves, and to give you a size of the depth. By day 6, we had made it close to halfway across. There was a question earlier about, I'm going to pull my chat back up to make sure questions aren't coming through. These are a picture of the albatross, and the albatross did follow us all the way across the Drake. See a question on here from Jack Piers. Freshwater, how much? So we actually had a desalinator on the boat. And the desalinator we'd have it running a lot. We would drink probably 5 to 6 liters of water a day. And the desalinator basically was running the whole time. And here's a nice photo of Cameron in the nude. Cameron was, like I mentioned, he's a swimmer and an ocean swimming, holds many ocean records for swimming. So he was like, when we were on sea anchor and the wind was pushing us in the opposite direction, he decided he was going to go and jump in for a little swim. We all were a little jealous, I would say, because we were like, dang, Cameron, you just got clean. Like, we're all in our, stuff, sweating and dirty for the last 7 days. And here's Cameron jumping in the water, getting himself a little shower. The water's only 0 degrees, but there's trade-offs. Here's another photo of us rowing. This is towards the end on day 10. And you can see we're wearing the safety suits by this point, because we had decided that the conditions were dangerous enough there at the end. And we wanted to make sure we had all the safety precautions in place. And you can see some other things about the boat. We had these holds throughout the boat. So in each hold, we had different things, like we had tools, we had our food, safety supplies, everything was in here. And you can also see these are bladders of water that we would just constantly fill up. Also some water canisters here that we were just constantly filling as we went. Yeah, and the question from Jim, did your seat slide as like in a cruise shell? They did. So it was basically like the size of these oars is what you would often see in a sweep rowing boat. When you're in a sculling boat, which means you have two handles, oftentimes the oars are smaller, but in this boat, because the boat is so much bigger than a river rowing boat or a racing shell, the oars were about the size of what a sweep oar would be. And we had, so you can see each of us had 2 oars as you're rowing, but there also were replacement oars. Over the trip, we did break, I think we broke 1 oar, but we had enough to replace every oar on the boat as we were going through. And let me keep going. So day 11 is when we hit our biggest storm, which was really tough because we knew we were really close to the peninsula. And it was just kind of like the one phrase that we always use is like the Drake never lets you go. It just was a constant battle. Let me see, I gotta see what photo this is. Oh yeah, I'm gonna show you another photo. We're actually in this picture, and if you're looking for it, where's the boat? You can see right here, that's us. Let me see if I can play the video. There we are. Go to the next slide. There we go. Yeah, so by day 11, when we were going, when we were really close to shore, we had a huge storm. And you can see here's a photo of us actually going on sea anchor because these waves did get big. And some waves were breaking over the top. And so we decided to go on sea anchor. And that was really challenging because we knew we were just, if not a day, maybe 2 days away from being able to see land. There's a question from Skip, who took the videos from outside the boat. Like I said, there was a safety vessel following us, and that's where the Discovery Channel crew was filming us. And just one note on that, so they followed us, but we never were able to make contact with them as part of getting the world record to cross the Drake unassisted. But they were just there, they were there filming us. So they did, in calm weather, they would put a drone up into the air and they could fly the drone over the top of the boat and take footage of us that way. And we also, before we left, they gave us GoPros. And so we would use the GoPros inside the cabins and take videos that way as well. Jamie's asking a tough question. In considering the trip, did you grapple with taking on such a dangerous adventure where you risked your life by choice with being a parent, the risk of your kid losing you, or is it something you had to do? Yeah, that came up for me. That for me was the hardest part of the whole trip. We did have a satellite phone, and I was able to call Sarah and Mari. And when I called, for the next 6 hours after I called, I was kind of like, you idiot, you're out here on this ocean. You've got this, your beautiful daughter and wife at home. Like, why are you out here on this water? And those thoughts creeping into your head made the rowing really, really challenging. And you kind of had to just focus everything outside of your brain and focus really narrowly on what you were doing in front of you. I think that's also another way that you can handle and deal with immense pain too. It's kind of compartmentalizing. And that's what I would have to do. But for me, the hardest part of the trip was having those calls with Sarah. And also when I told Sarah about the trip, she said to me, I knew you were going to ask me to do something stupid like this when we got married. So like, this is it. Don't ever ask me for something like this again. Have fun and come back alive.
Hey, John, there's two questions that you may not have seen, and they're
Oh,
the
yeah.
same. How were you funded?
How were we funded? Initially, when we started the trip, we were self-funded, and I was out trying to raise some money to go and do it. But then once Discovery came on, Colin O'Brady was the last person to come on, and Colin has had success in other areas with exploring, including crossing the Antarctica on foot. And so Discovery Channel picked him. He was able to bring Discovery Channel on, and Discovery was able to fund a large part of this trip. Let's see. All right, let me go to the next slide here. Yeah, so this is just another photo of us out on the boat on the deck while everybody else is inside in one of these big storms, and you can see the waves kind of coming up from behind us, and the boat is there at an angle. In big storms, it actually felt like you were rowing downhill. You're just constantly like looking up at the top of the crest of these waves and coming down them. And finally, this was one of the most beautiful sights I've ever seen in my life. Imagine if you've ever been to the Rockies, coming out of a storm, coming out of a gray mist into this view, which is one of the first islands you see in the South Shetland Islands. And it is a peak, I believe, almost 4,000 feet out of the water. So it juts just out of the water. It's covered in snow, and it's just breathtaking. It looks like one of the peaks of the Rockies. And so when we saw this, it was kind of a sigh of relief that we had made it. And I remember we all called our families at this point, and we were like, I think we're going to be alive and come home. So just let everybody know that we're going to be able to do this. And just one note is I know Buddy introduced us as the first to cross the Drake Passage unassisted. There is another boat that crossed in 1988. The captain of that boat, his name was Ned Gillette, and he did have a crew of 4 people. The difference between their crossing and ours, they left from Cape Horn as well, and they had a sail on their boat, which is just a huge, huge advantage in terms of capturing the wind power and moving your boat across. It's a big difference between just rowing and having that sail there. But what they did was remarkable as well. And Ned Gillette actually is no longer living. I think there's only one guy who's on that boat who's still alive. But what they did was also amazing. They also stopped here at the first island, and we continued to row across the strait between the South Shetland Islands and the peninsula, and then into the final area where the peninsula is. Okay, I'm going to keep pushing forward because I think there's only a couple more photos, and then I'll answer all the questions. Yeah, so this is just us rowing into the peninsula, and I would honestly say that in terms of physical difficulty, this was almost the most challenging part of the whole trip, because at this point we're out of the current. We are getting hit by a side wind, so we're no longer getting a tailwind, and so there's nothing assisting our boat to move forward from weather, which meant that it was just sheer manpower and muscle to get the boat moving forward in a forward direction. And on top of that, for me personally, this may be TMI for this early on a Friday morning, but I had I had gotten a sore on one of my butt cheeks that was essentially creating a hole in my butt, and I literally could not sit on one side of my rear end. And so that was just an excruciating amount of pain for 36 hours of having to row really hard and then also just feel that immense pain. but there was the reward of getting close and getting close to these icebergs and seeing the final stretch here. You can see us rowing. The water got really calm, which was beautiful. That's Fian Paul is the guy in front, Andrew Town is the guy in the middle, and then I'm in the bow. Just another photo of us crossing the icebergs. And finally, the final glory picture of arrival. Somebody was like, hey, it would be cool if we lit our flares, right? And I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. So we all lit flares right as we were getting close to shore. And here's us on shore, the 6 of us at the end. Much skinnier than when we left. That is a picture of Jamie's feet. And those are not my feet, but those are Jamie's feet. Just to give you a sense of how our bodies looked afterwards. I see a picture here from Mark Cohen. How long did it take you to physically recover? We got hammered out there, and this is a picture. I won't leave it up for too long because I know it's early and not out of breakfast yet. But we did get really, really physically beaten up, and Jamie's feet especially got beaten up because he decided to wear his boots without socks one time, and that was the end of his feet when he decided to make that decision. So let me see if I can go back to questions here, make sure I didn't miss anything.
John, if okay with you, I'm going to reclaim the host and your slides will go away. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, Benny.
Hi.
You want to say hi?
That's smart.
Hi.
Say hi. Yeah, so do you want me to, I can just go to the chat and read the questions here. How were immediate type decisions made? That was from Lammer and Sunrise. Can you tell me more about your question?
Yes, this is Rolf. So I was thinking in terms of if you had to make a fairly immediate decision in terms of some sort of, for instance, putting the anchor out or something of that sort, was it a team decision or was there somebody that pretty much led the charge on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are ocean faring rules, and so the captain always gets to make the decision. And so we would follow Fian. Like if Fian decided that we needed to do something, we would follow his orders, and we trusted him on the decisions that he was making out there. I do remember there was one moment, somebody asked about tense moments. I remember the first time we decided to put out the sea anchor, Andrew Town, one of his jobs he was responsible for was actually putting the sea anchor out. And Cameron was stroking, for some reason Fian was on the navigation equipment and Andrew and I were rowing. And Andrew's like, should I put it out? Should I put it out? And Cameron turns around and he goes, Andrew, put it now. And, I think that between Cameron and Fian, the two of them, experience on the ocean, we trusted the decisions that they were making, but ultimately Fian made those decisions.
Thank you for sharing your experience. Amazing.
Thanks, Rob. Let's see.
So here's a question. How did you assemble the team? I'm sure you just went to some of your buddies and said, so you guys want to row the Drake Passage? And they all said, yeah, I'm in.
More or less. No, I think, so Fian was had crossed every ocean except this one. And he, a couple years ago, said, this is something that I want to do. He had met Andrew Town through another ocean rower who we had all rowed with in college at Yale. And Andrew reached out to Fian. Andrew was in the military. And Andrew was coming off of that and decided that he wanted to do some type of big expedition. And so he and Fionn connected, and then Andrew then tapped into his rowing contacts and emailed out.
Each other.
Contacted his rowing contacts and emailed out to the whole group saying, hey, I'm thinking about going on this trip, not able to get details, but if you're interested, email me. And that's how I got in contact with Andrew, and it sort of went from there. Fionn, Cameron, and Jamie had all rowed together across the Indian Ocean. And so I think Fionn wanted to bring the two of them back because he trusted them and knew that they were good rowers. And then Andrew was able to recruit me onto the team. Does that answer your question, Skip?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay.
Ben, did you have a question?
Me?
Yeah, you're unmuted, so I thought maybe you wanted to speak.
Sorry, I do. John, how are you doing?
Hey,
congratulations. It's pretty remarkable.
Thank you.
As I had said earlier, Dana's on the call. Offline, we'd like to get in touch with you about our community involvement program with the Oakland Strokes and working with your school. So I don't know how to make that happen in terms of connectivity or how we get your contact information, but we'd love to.
I'll coordinate that if John's willing.
Great. Well, I hope he's willing.
Yeah.
So,
I actually texted Dana separate on the side and gave him my email address too.
Oh, you did? Okay, never mind. All right, super.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Great, wonderful.
John Jenkins, you have a question?
Just a couple years, I guess not a question, but a couple of years ago, I subjected our Rotary Club to a fundraiser at San Pablo, all around rowing. So a lot of our folks know it. Jamie Texter is also a former rower, so you've got some rowers on the call as well. So congratulations. Pretty amazing feat.
Thank you.
John Jenkins, did you have a question?
Yeah, my question is, as a principal in a charter school, how are you using this very inspirational message with your young people, giving them courage and so forth?
Yeah, good question. When I got back, I did the speaking circuit, so to speak, at my school, and I went to every classroom and did a similar presentation and talked to our kids about the trip. I work in West Oakland, which has my student population is mostly Black and brown kids, and in the world of rowing, it's a pretty white place. And so I've talked to my kids a lot about the access that they could have to be rowers and athletes, and also just we talked a lot about pursuing dreams that you have, and that if there's something that you want to accomplish, you can do it. And we talk a lot about especially with our younger students. We also talk a lot about just the two things I mentioned before: the power of teamwork and the power of positivity. Another phrase I like to use with our kids a lot is dream big and start small, which I think is always something that's true for anything you do in life. And I think the start small piece on this trip is, we did have this big dream of crossing the Drake Passage and, rowing through 40-foot waves and making it across alive. But what got us through was all the small moments in between. Are you, taking care? Are you eating every shift? Are you sleeping every shift? Are you drinking water every single time you go out onto the deck? Are you making sure you're wearing your gloves? Is your life jacket hooked up? All these little small details are the things that kept us alive and kept us going. And so we talk similarly at school about, how do you tackle a test? What are the small steps in preparation to getting up to that test? What are the small things that you're doing while you're actually taking it? Are you taking deep breaths? Is your pencil sharpened? Are you able to go back and read your questions, applying these other strategies to any part of life, even in the school?
Wow. Yeah.
John, this is Conrad Brees. All I can say is I feel like I just rode the Indian Ocean. The presentation was fantastic, and you brought us right into the action.
Thanks, Conrad.
Yeah. And John, I'd like to ask you a question and then make a little special offer on top of the special presentation we're going to make at the end. is, did you guys ever break out into song while you're rowing and rowing? I mean, did somebody have to come up with something, or a Buffett song or something? Yeah, or a Buffett song to make you feel warm? What'd you do?
One song that we sang a lot, and Colin loves Bob Marley. Colin would sing Redemption Song, and we, for some reason, that song like sticks out in my brain as a thing out there on the water. Yeah, we're seeing the Maker right in front of us, and wanted redemption before.
I just finished his book about Antarctica, and he mentioned Bob Marley tons to that book. And also, if you have the stomach for it, you're more than welcome to come for a flight with me and my ultralight around Mount Diablo.
My pass.
George Chafee, it looked like you had a question.
Yeah, just a comment. The book you mentioned on Shackleton, I think it's called what, Endurance?
Oh yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Endurance, and we've used that in leadership training. It's one of the best books, really, on leadership that exists. It's an incredible, and he didn't lose a single person, which was amazing.
I mean, what they did was their feat is absolutely amazing, as you just said. I don't know if there's any other way to say it. I mean, we have modern technology, navigational equipment, space to escape the elements if we needed to. They were out there in their, sealskins, essentially, and going across the same water in just super treacherous conditions. And the fact that they did make it all across, I'm sure that they probably utilized some of the similar things we've been talking about of, this idea of the power of positivity and teamwork, and just that mindset that you're going to make it through is incredible in terms of what he was able to lead and what they were able to accomplish as a team.
Chris, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, just real quickly, what's your next adventure, if you have?
Potty training a 2-year-old, which actually we are doing right now, which is a challenge. I'll say that. Before the pandemic, I always wanted to climb Mount Whitney, and that's something that I might still consider. Colin and I had talked about doing that together. But for now, I think it's just continuing to lead a school through the pandemic, which has also presented its challenges, and being a dad, and thankful for having that opportunity. I think I don't know if I took it for granted before, but I think I'm more appreciative now after doing this trip.
Thank you.
Any final questions? Okay, let's wrap up here. John, I just want to, on behalf of the club, thank you for being here today, sharing your adventure with us, sharing information about life skills and what you do in your day job. And we have a little certificate to present to you. Can you all see this? Hopefully you can see this. And what we're going to do is to give a prosthetic hand to someone that needs one in another country. And it's a prosthetic that was invented by a Rotarian locally. And in your name, a prosthetic hand will be presented to someone that needs one. So
that's amazing. Thank you.
Okay. We have some applause happening here. Again, thank you, John.
Thank you all.
With that, I think that we should wrap it up. Again, there is a awards breakfast at like 10 o'clock tomorrow. You can register. Whatever you do this weekend, be safe. As the communities start to open up, there's more risks out there and more opportunities to get sick. So don't do that. All right. Everybody have a good weekend. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Hey, John, the word that went through my mind is better you than me at each step of the way. That was really gripping.
It was.
Thank you. Yeah. Somebody said, "Will you go back across the Drake?" Would you go back across the Drake again like that? I don't think there's any chance that I would do that again the same way. loved it while I was doing it and happy that I did it, but
Yeah.
I would try it again.
You know, I would advise people, what you said is that book on Shackleton is after having heard your story and seen the pictures, people here would go and read that book, which is an easy read, but it's a fabulous follow-up to this program.
It's a great documentary. We just saw it in preparation for this to get in the mindset on Netflix. Yeah, on Shackleton.
They're going to be doing a documentary of our trip as well. Discovery will be, that they'll release in the next couple of months too. So it should be a full length movie that you can watch of the trip as well.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, buddy, when I get that information, I can send it to you so you can send it out to the group.
Great. Thank you so much. Really, truly enjoyed it. It was awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So long.
Follow-up to Free Solo or something. Another grouper.
Yeah, exactly.
Free Solo.
Which
Solo still makes me nervous, and I've watched it twice.
Yeah, I have too. But I just contacted Jimmy Chin to come speak at Rotary, and he said, "Yeah, I'll come do it for 10 grand."
Maybe you can get Kim over as son that was a photographer on it.
I talked with her about that, and she said, "Oh yeah, I'll reach him." And I keep bugging her, and she doesn't. I don't think she wants him to. So anyway.
Yeah.
Hey, buddy. One other question. I know there were a lot of chats, and I may not have gotten to all the questions. If you send me the chat after the copy of the chat, I'm happy to
fine. Okay.
To follow up with folks.
We'll do our best on that, John. I find sometimes Zoom doesn't retain the whole
disappears.
thing, so
yeah. Okay.
we'll do our best.
Let me make a screenshot of it.
Well, and it looks like you got through most of them. I've got it up on my screen, and I think you caught pretty much almost all of them.
Yes, I think so. Looks like it. Yeah, looks like you got it.
Well, here I'll send my email out here in the chat. So if anybody wants to email me privately, they can.
Great. Okay, that's wonderful.
Where is that a backdrop behind you, Rich? Sure. At first I thought.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
And then
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Catch you later.
That is the tunnel overlook in Yosemite, just outside the Wawona Tunnel, and that I actually took that with an iPhone that shows that even a blind squirrel finds an acorn every now and again. I like that shot. I have one also looking the other direction at the parking lot, which is not a pretty shot, but I took it to show that nobody, literally nobody, was in that parking lot, and I figured that was a vision I would never see again in my life.
Was that deliberately black and white, or was it just a black and white day?
No, it's just a black and white day. I wouldn't begin to know how to tell my iPhone to take a black and white photo.
Well, I could show you if you want, but hey.
No, that's just the way the day looked, and with the mist and the snow and whatnot. That was in January, 2017, I believe.
Wow. Yeah, we found some beautiful dry days in January. We've gone there a few times in January. It's just remarkable. It's fabulous. Best time to go, actually. I agree. It
wasn't that dry because once we hit the valley, we had to have chains on the car the whole time we were in the valley.
Wow.
But yeah, it was. In fact, I think this was actually inauguration day. We kind of deliberately wanted to be away from televisions.
Well, no comment, but yeah. Here's one. Speaking of speakers, we've got still a couple of us on. Yeah. What I want to do for the next year, just while we're tossing around, speaking of speakers, we want to incorporate more Rotary stuff into our speaker sequence. So see if somebody wants to, say, have one meeting per quarter to do some Rotary affiliated program. One a quarter, I think, is probably pretty good, because we're becoming generic. Like John's talk had nothing to do with Rotary. So we probably need to incorporate more of that. So I'm working on that. So that's my thought. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's probably a good thing to do.
Yeah, just do that. And we have, anyway, I signed up a couple yesterday. I think it's going to be pretty good. So
seems like we have a district governor that we know that might be able to point us to some Rotary types that would be good.
Yeah.
You mean a past district governor? What's his name?
In the future.
Greg, Gary Chaffee, somebody like that.
There's that, but there's also one in 2 weeks that'll be the district governor.
Mm-hmm. We don't want to overload him. So, you know what I did? I asked Alex Arnold, and Alex is saying, Alex is thinking about it because I asked him initially, could you take care of that? So we'll see. If he doesn't come back with beating his chest saying, oh boy, we'll see if somebody wants to. So that's that. That's my thought on that. Oh, that's that. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to shut this thing down.
Good weekend, all.
Ditto.
Bye-bye.